Lecture 6, Authentication and Account Management. Theme, Access Control and Identity Management. Technical University of Moldova. Lecturer, Maxim Masiyutin, Associate Professor. Introduction. Hello, everyone. Last lecture, we explored access control models and briefly touched on authentication. Today, we're going to dive deep into authentication technologies and account management practices. This is arguably one of the most critical areas in modern security because, as the saying goes, identity is the new perimeter. Let me share a statistic that should concern all of us. According to the 2025 Identity Security Threat Landscape Report, compromised credentials remain the #1 attack vector, involved in over 80% of web application breaches. Despite decades of research and billions of dollars invested in security technologies, we still struggle to answer the fundamental question: is this person really who they claim to be? The landscape of authentication has changed dramatically in recent years. We've moved from simple passwords to multi-factor authentication, from on-premises identity stores to cloud-based identity providers, and from perimeter-based security to zero-trust architectures. Today, we'll explore all of these topics, and I'll help you understand not just what these technologies do, but why they matter and how they fit together. Part 1. Authentication Factors. In our previous lecture, I introduced the 5 categories of authentication factors. Today, let's examine each in more detail, with a focus on practical implementation and security considerations. Knowledge factors, the password problem. Something you know, passwords, PINs, passphrase, security questions, remains the most widely used authentication factor despite being the weakest. The reasons for passwords persistence are simple. They're cheap to implement, users understand them, and they don't require any special hardware. But passwords have fundamental problems. Human memory is limited, so users choose simple, memorable passwords. Studies consistently show that the most common passwords are things like 123456, password, and QWERTY. Even when users try to create complex passwords, they often follow predictable patterns, capitalizing the first letter, adding a number at the end, substituting a with at. Password reuse is epidemic. The average user has over 100 online accounts, but uses only about a dozen distinct passwords. When one service is breached, attackers try those credentials against other services, a technique called credential stuffing. In 2025, we've seen credential stuffing attacks that test millions of stolen credentials against popular services within hours of a breach disclosure. Organizations have tried to address password weakness through policies: minimum length, complexity requirements, regular expiration. But research has shown that many of these policies are counterproductive. Complex requirements lead users to write passwords down or use predictable substitution patterns. Mandatory expiration leads to password 1, password 2, password 3 sequences. The modern guidance from NSD and other authorities has shifted. The current recommendations emphasize length over complexity. Passphrase like correct horse battery staple are both more secure and more memorable than P at SSW0RD. Password expiration should be eliminated except when compromise is suspected. Compromised password checking should be implemented, blocking passwords that appear in known breach databases. Possession factors, what you have. Something you have provides a second layer of security. Even if an attacker knows your password, they cannot authenticate without physical access to your token or device. This category includes hardware tokens, smart cards, mobile phones, and security keys. One-time password, OTP, tokens have been used for decades. Traditional hardware tokens like RSA Secure ID generate a new 6-digit code every 30 or 60 seconds, synchronized with an authentication server. These codes are only valid once and expire quickly, so even if an attacker intercepts one, it's useless by the time they try to use it. Software-based OTP has largely replaced hardware tokens. Apps like Google Authenticator, Microsoft Authenticator, and Authy implement the time-based one-time password, TOTP, algorithm defined in RFC 6238. The app and server share a secret key, and both use this key along with the current time to generate the same code. This provides equivalent security to hardware tokens at no additional cost. SMS-based OTP sends a code to your phone via text message. This is convenient because it doesn't require installing an app, but it has significant security weaknesses. SIM swapping attacks, where attackers convince mobile carriers to transfer your phone number to their SIM card, have become common. SS7 network vulnerabilities allow sophisticated attackers to intercept text messages. For these reasons, NIST deprecated SMS as an authentication factor in 2016, though it remains widely used due to its convenience. Push notification authentication is an improvement over SMS. Instead of typing a code, you receive a push notification asking, "Did you just try to log in?" and simply tap yes or no. This is more resistant to phishing because there's no code to enter on a fake site. However, users can become conditioned to approve every notification without thinking, a problem called MFA fatigue that attackers exploit through notification bombing. Hardware security keys like YubiKey represent the gold standard for possession factors. These small USB or NFC devices implement strong cryptographic protocols and are resistant to phishing by design. When you authenticate with a security key, the key verifies the legitimate site's identity before responding, so a phishing site cannot capture usable credentials. We'll discuss these in detail when we cover FIDO2. Biometric factors, what you are. Biometrics use physical or behavioral characteristics for authentication. Fingerprints, facial recognition, iris scans, voice prints, and even gait analysis can all serve as authentication factors. Fingerprint recognition is the most mature biometric technology. Modern fingerprint sensors don't store an image of your fingerprint. They store a mathematical representation called a template. When you touch the sensor, it computes a new template and compares it to the stored one. This comparison must be fuzzy because no two readings are exactly alike, which creates the possibility of false matches. Facial recognition has become ubiquitous thanks to smartphones. Modern systems use infrared or structured light projectors to create a 3D model of your face, making them resistant to photographs. Apple's Face ID, introduced in 2017, claims a false match rate of 1 in a million, significantly better than Touch ID's fingerprint recognition. The challenge with biometrics is that they cannot be changed. If your fingerprint data is compromised, you cannot get a new fingerprint. This has already happened. The 2015 OPM breach exposed fingerprint data for millions of federal employees and contractors. For this reason, biometrics should never be the sole authentication factor for high-security applications. Biometric data also raises significant privacy concerns. Unlike passwords, biometrics reveal information about who you are. Facial recognition in particular has sparked controversy over surveillance and civil liberties. Organizations implementing biometrics must carefully consider the privacy implications and ensure compliance with regulations like GDPR. Contextual factors, where and how. Location and behavior provide additional authentication signals. Your IP address, GPS coordinates, the time of day, the device you're using, and your behavioral patterns can all inform authentication decisions. Risk-based authentication uses these signals to adjust the authentication strength required. If you're logging in from your usual device, at your usual time, from your usual location, the system might accept just a password. If you're logging in from a new device in a foreign country at 3 a.m., the system might require additional factors or block the attempt entirely. Behavioral biometrics analyze how you interact with systems. Your typing rhythm, the time between keystrokes, and how long you hold each key is surprisingly unique. The way you move your mouse, how you hold your phone, and your gesture patterns on touchscreens all create a behavioral fingerprint. These can provide continuous authentication, verifying your identity not just at login, but throughout your session. The advantage of contextual factors is that they're invisible to the user. You don't have to do anything extra. The system just observes your normal behavior. The challenge is accuracy. Behavioral patterns vary, and distinguishing between normal variation and an imposter is difficult. False positives, legitimate users blocked because their behavior seemed unusual, create frustration and reduce security through workarounds. Part 2. Multi-factor authentication, MFA. Multi-factor authentication requires users to provide multiple authentication factors from different categories. The principle is defense in depth. Compromising multiple independent factors is harder than compromising one. True MFA uses factors from different categories. Password plus security key is true MFA, knowledge plus possession. Password plus fingerprint is true MFA, knowledge plus inherent. Password plus security question is not true MFA. Both are knowledge factors, so compromising one may compromise the other. The security improvement from MFA is dramatic. Microsoft reports that MFA blocks 99.9% of automated attacks. Google reports that adding a phone-based factor blocks 100% of automated bots, 99% of bulk phishing attacks, and 66% of targeted attacks. However, MFA is not a silver bullet. Sophisticated attackers have developed techniques to bypass MFA. Real-time phishing proxies capture both the password and the MFA code, replaying them to the legitimate site before the code expires. Social engineering can trick users into approving fraudulent MFA prompts. SIM swapping defeats SMS-based MFA. The implementation of MFA matters as much as whether it's implemented at all. Organizations should prioritize phishing-resistant MFA methods like FIDO2 security keys. They should implement number matching or context display for push notifications to prevent MFA fatigue attacks. And they should ensure MFA covers all access paths, including VPNs, cloud applications, and administrative interfaces. Part 3. Passwordless authentication. Passwordless authentication eliminates passwords entirely, typically replacing them with possession factors, security keys or phones, and biometric factors. This approach removes the weakest link in traditional authentication while often improving user experience. The passwordless movement has accelerated dramatically since 2023. Microsoft reports that over 90% of their employees use passwordless authentication. Apple, Google, and Microsoft have all implemented passkey support in their operating systems and browsers. According to the FIDO Alliance, passkey availability reached critical mass in 2025, with support across all major platforms. The benefits of passwordless authentication are substantial. Users cannot choose weak passwords if there are no passwords. Phishing becomes much harder when there are no credentials to enter. Help desk costs decrease dramatically. Password resets are one of the largest IT support expenses. User experience improves because touching a fingerprint sensor is faster than typing a password. The challenges of passwordless authentication center on recovery and edge cases. What happens when a user loses their security key or gets a new phone? How do users authenticate from shared or public computers? Organizations implementing passwordless authentication must carefully design recovery workflows that maintain security while remaining usable. Part 4. FIDO2 and WebAuthn. FIDO2 is the technical standard that enables modern passwordless authentication. It consists of two components, WebAuthn, a web browser API, and CTAP2, a protocol for communicating with authenticators like security keys. Let me explain how FIDO2 works. When you register with a FIDO2-enabled service, your authenticator generates a new public-private key pair unique to that service. The private key never leaves the authenticator. It's stored in secure hardware. The public key is sent to the service and stored with your account. When you log in, the service sends a challenge, a random number. Your authenticator signs this challenge with the private key and returns the signature. The service verifies the signature using your public key. If the signature is valid, you're authenticated. The security of FIDO2 comes from several properties. First, credentials are unique per service. There's no credential to reuse across sites. Second, credentials are bound to the legitimate service's origin. The authenticator checks the domain and won't respond to a phishing site. Third, the private key never leaves the authenticator. There's nothing to steal in a server breach. FIDO2 authenticators come in several forms. Roaming authenticators are separate hardware devices like YubiKeys that you carry with you. Platform authenticators are built into your device. Windows Hello, Touch ID, Face ID, and Android Biometrics all function as FIDO2 authenticators. This means most modern devices already support FIDO2 without additional hardware. Part 5. Passkeys. Passkeys represent the consumer-friendly evolution of FIDO2. While FIDO2 was originally designed around hardware security keys, passkeys make the same technology accessible to everyone through platform authenticators and cloud synchronization. A passkey is simply a FIDO2 credential that can be synced across your devices. When you create a passkey on your iPhone, it's stored in iCloud keychain and becomes available on your other Apple devices. Similarly, Google Password Manager syncs passkeys across Android devices and Chrome browsers, while Microsoft syncs passkeys across Windows devices. This solves the recovery problem that limited FIDO2 adoption. With hardware security keys, losing your key meant losing access. With passkeys, your credentials survive device loss because they're backed up to the cloud. The backup itself is end-to-end encrypted, so even the cloud provider cannot access your passkeys. Passkey adoption has been remarkable. In 2025, major services including Google, Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, PayPal, and many others support passkey authentication. Industry projections suggest passkeys will become the dominant consumer authentication method by 2027, finally delivering on the decades-old promise of killing the password. From a security perspective, passkeys are a significant improvement over passwords. They're phishing-resistant by design. They cannot be weak or reused. They provide cryptographic proof of possession. However, they do introduce new considerations around cloud account security. If your Google account is compromised, your Google Sync passkeys may be at risk. Part 6. Single Sign-On and Federated Identity. Single Sign-On, SSO, allows users to authenticate once and access multiple applications without re-authenticating. Federated identity extends this concept across organizational boundaries, allowing users from one organization to access resources in another. SSO dramatically improves user experience and reduces password proliferation. Instead of maintaining separate credentials for every application, users maintain credentials with an identity provider, IDP, and use those credentials everywhere. This reduces the number of passwords users must manage, which reduces password reuse and weak password selection. From a security perspective, SSO concentrates authentication in one place. This can be good. You can implement strong authentication once and have it protect everything. But it also creates a high-value target. Compromise the IDP, and you compromise everything. SSO systems must be designed and operated with the highest security standards. The major enterprise SSO protocols are SAML, OAuth 2.0, and OpenID Connect. Let's examine each. SAML, Security Assertion Markup Language. SAML, developed in the early 2000s, is the traditional standard for enterprise SSO. It uses XML-based assertions to convey authentication and attribute information between an identity provider and a service provider. In a typical SAML flow, when you access an application, the service provider, it redirects you to your organization's identity provider. You authenticate with the IDP, which creates a SAML assertion, a signed XML document containing your identity and attributes. This assertion is sent back to the service provider, which validates the signature and grants access. SAML is widely deployed in enterprises, with support from all major identity providers, Azure AD, Okta, Ping Identity, and thousands of applications. However, SAML has limitations. The XML-based protocol is complex and verbose. It was designed for web browsers and doesn't work well for mobile apps or APIs. It lacks native support for authorization. SAML handles who you are, but not what you can do. OAuth 2.0 Authorization Framework. OAuth 2.0, despite what the name suggests, is not an authentication protocol. It's an authorization framework. OAuth answers the question, does this application have permission to access my data, rather than who am I? The classic OAuth use case is third-party access. When you use Login with Google to create an account on a new service, you're granting that service permission to read your Google profile information. Google authenticates you, but the third-party service receives an access token, not your credentials. The service never sees your Google password. OAuth 2.0 defines several grant types for different scenarios. The authorization code grant is used for web applications. The PKC extension adds security for mobile and single-page applications. Client Credentials Grant is used for service-to-service communication. Each grant type addresses different security requirements and threat models. The key concepts in OAuth are tokens. Access tokens are presented to APIs to prove authorization. They're typically short-lived, minutes to hours. Refresh tokens are used to obtain new access tokens. They're longer-lived, days to months, and must be stored securely. OpenID Connect, authentication on OAuth. OpenID Connect, OIDC, adds an authentication layer on top of OAuth 2.0. While OAuth tells you what the user has authorized, OIDC tells you who the user is. This makes OIDC suitable for single sign-on scenarios. OIDC introduces the ID token, a JSON Web Token, JWT, containing claims about the authenticated user, their identifier, name, email, and other attributes. Unlike access tokens, which are opaque to the application, ID tokens are designed to be parsed and understood. The combination of OAuth 2.0 and OIDC has become the modern standard for identity. OIDC handles authentication and provides user information. OAuth 2.0 handles authorization and provides API access. Together, they provide a complete identity solution that works across web, mobile, and API applications. OIDC has largely replaced SAML for new deployments due to its simpler JSON-based format and better support for modern application architectures. However, SAML remains entrenched in enterprises with legacy applications, so understanding both protocols is essential. Part 7. Zero Trust Architecture. Zero Trust is a security model based on the principle never trust, always verify. Unlike traditional perimeter-based security, which assumes everything inside the network is trusted, Zero Trust assumes breach and verifies every request as if it originated from an untrusted network. The Zero Trust model was articulated by Forrester Research in 2010 and gained prominence after Google published their BeyondCorp implementation in 2014. By 2025, Zero Trust has become the dominant security architecture philosophy, driven by cloud adoption, remote work, and increasingly sophisticated attacks. The core principles of Zero Trust are: first, verify explicitly. Always authenticate and authorize based on all available data points: identity, device, location, service, data classification, anomalies. Don't assume that because someone authenticated this morning, they're still the legitimate user this afternoon. Second, use least privilege access. Limit access with just-in-time and just enough access. Implement risk-based adaptive policies. Protect both data and systems with microsegmentation. Third, assume breach. Minimize blast radius and segment access. Verify end-to-end encryption. Use analytics to get visibility, detect threats, and improve defenses. Implementing Zero Trust requires capabilities across multiple areas. Identity is the foundation: strong authentication, identity governance, and continuous verification. Devices must be known and compliant: device registration, health attestation, and compliance policies. Networks provide segmentation and encryption, microsegmentation, encrypted communications, and threat protection. Applications enforce policy, access controls, cloud access security, and secure access service edge. Data is classified and protected: data classification, encryption, and data loss prevention. Zero Trust is not a product you can buy. It's an architectural approach that requires changes across people, processes, and technology. Organizations typically implement Zero Trust incrementally, starting with identity and expanding to other areas over time. Part 8. Privileged Access Management, PM. Privileged accounts, administrators, root users, service accounts, have elevated access that makes them high-value targets. Privileged access management is the practice of securing, controlling, and monitoring privileged access. The risks of privileged accounts are severe. According to Forrester, 80% of security breaches involve privileged credentials. A compromised administrator account can bypass security controls, access any data, and cover tracks. Insider threats from privileged users are particularly dangerous because these users have the knowledge and access to cause maximum damage. PM solutions typically include several components. Privileged credential vaulting stores administrative credentials in an encrypted vault rather than letting administrators know the actual passwords. When administrators need access, they check out credentials for a limited time. The vault can automatically rotate passwords after each use. Session management records and monitors privileged sessions. Every command an administrator types, every screen they see, is logged. This provides forensic evidence in case of incidents and DDoS misuse. Advanced solutions can detect suspicious behavior in real time and terminate sessions. Just-in-time access grants elevated privileges only when needed and only for as long as needed. Instead of having permanent administrator rights, users request elevated access for specific tasks. The request may require approval, and access automatically expires. Service account management extends PM to non-human identities. Service accounts, API keys, and other application credentials are often forgotten after initial deployment. PM solutions discover, vault, and rotate these credentials. The leading PM vendors include CyberArk, BeyondTrust, Delinea, and HashiCorp Vault. Cloud providers also offer native PM capabilities. AWS Systems Manager Session Manager, Azure Privileged Identity Management, and GCP Identity-Aware Proxy all provide privileged access controls. Part 9. Account Lifecycle Management. Account lifecycle management encompasses the creation, modification, and deletion of user accounts throughout their existence. This sounds mundane, but getting it wrong creates significant security risks. The lifecycle begins with provisioning, creating accounts, and granting initial access. In modern organizations, provisioning should be automated based on authoritative HR data. When someone is hired, their account should be created automatically with appropriate group memberships and access rights based on their role and department. Modification happens throughout the account's life. Users change roles, take on new responsibilities, join new projects. Each change should update their access rights. This is where access creep becomes a problem. Users accumulate access for new responsibilities, but rarely lose access for old ones. A user who has been in an organization for 20 years, changing roles several times, may have accumulated access far beyond what their current role requires. Access reviews or access certifications are periodic processes where managers or resource owners review who has access and confirm it's still appropriate. These reviews are often compliance requirements, but they're also operationally important for identifying and removing unnecessary access. Modern identity governance solutions automate much of this process, presenting reviewers with context and recommendations. Deprovisioning, disabling or deleting accounts when users leave, is critical and often poorly handled. According to studies, the average organization has thousands of orphaned accounts belonging to former employees that were never disabled. These accounts are attractive targets for attackers because no one is monitoring them. Effective deprovisioning requires integration between HR systems and identity management. When someone is terminated in the HR system, their accounts should be disabled immediately. 4 high-risk terminations. Users with extensive access. Users leaving under negative circumstances. Accounts should be disabled before the employee is even notified. Part 10. Identity Governance and Administration, IGA. Identity governance and administration encompasses the policies, processes, and technologies for managing digital identities and their access rights. IGA goes beyond basic identity management to include governance functions like compliance, risk management, and policy enforcement. Key capabilities of IGA solutions include identity lifecycle management, which we just discussed. This includes provisioning, modifications, and deprovisioning, ideally automated and policy-driven. Access request and approval workflows allow users to request access through a self-service portal. Requests are routed to appropriate approvers based on the resource and requester. This provides a documented, auditable process for granting access. Access certification automates the periodic review process. The system generates review campaigns, notifying managers of access that needs review. Reviewers can approve, revoke, or flag for investigation. Results are documented for compliance purposes. Separation of duties enforcement prevents users from accumulating toxic combinations of access. The system can block requests that would create violations or flag existing violations for remediation. Role management helps organizations define, maintain, and optimize their role structure. This includes role mining, analyzing existing access patterns to identify potential roles, and role engineering, designing roles based on business requirements. Reporting and analytics provide visibility into identity and access data. Dashboards show access risk metrics. Reports demonstrate compliance with policies and regulations. Analytics identify anomalies and optimization opportunities. The leading IGA vendors include SailPoint, Saviynt, Omada, and OneIdentity. Cloud providers are expanding their identity governance capabilities with Azure AD Governance, AWS Identity Center, and Google Cloud Identity, all adding governance features. Part 11. Emerging Trends in Authentication. Let me conclude by discussing some emerging trends that will shape authentication in the coming years. Decentralized identity uses blockchain and distributed ledger technologies to give users control over their identity credentials. Instead of relying on centralized identity providers, users hold verifiable credentials in digital wallets. They can selectively disclose attributes, proving they're over 21 without revealing their birth date, for example. While still maturing, decentralized identity pilots are underway in government and financial services. Continuous authentication moves beyond point-in-time verification to ongoing confirmation of identity throughout a session. Using behavioral biometrics, device signals, and contextual factors, systems can detect when someone other than the authenticated user may be using the session. This addresses the risk of session hijacking and shared credential use. Adaptive authentication dynamically adjusts authentication requirements based on risk. Low-risk scenarios might require only a password. Higher-risk scenarios, unusual location, sensitive data access, privileged operations, might require additional factors or step-up authentication. This balances security with user experience. Machine identity management addresses the growing population of non-human identities, service accounts, APIs, bots, IoT devices, and AI agents. These identities often outnumber human identities and are frequently forgotten or poorly managed. As organizations adopt more automation and AI, machine identity management becomes critical. AI in authentication uses machine learning to improve both security and user experience. AI can detect anomalies suggesting compromised accounts, identify patterns indicating credential stuffing attacks, and reduce false positives in risk-based authentication. However, AI also enables new attacks, including deepfake audio and video for biometric spoofing. Conclusion: authentication and account management are at the heart of security. They determine who can access your systems and data, and they're often the first line of defense against attackers. Getting authentication right is essential. Getting it wrong leaves you vulnerable regardless of what other security controls you implement. We've covered a lot of ground today, from authentication factors through modern protocols to account lifecycle management. The key themes to remember are: use multiple factors, prefer phishing-resistant methods, implement zero-trust principles, manage the entire identity lifecycle, and stay current with evolving threats and technologies. In our next lecture, we'll explore network security technologies, firewalls, VPNs, intrusion detection, and more. We'll see how network security complements identity security in a defense in-depth strategy. Discussion questions: will passwords eventually be completely replaced by passwordless authentication, and what obstacles remain? How does the zero-trust model change the role of authentication compared to traditional perimeter-based security? What risks does the consolidation of identity providers create, and how should organizations mitigate them? Thank you for your attention. I'll see you next time. Review questions. Compare and contrast the 5 categories of authentication factors. What are the strengths and weaknesses of each? Why is SMS-based MFA considered less secure than app-based TOTP or hardware security keys? Explain how FIDO2 and WebAuthn provides phishing resistance. What is the difference between OAuth 2.0 and OpenID Connect? When would you use each? Describe the 3 core principles of zero-trust architecture. What is privileged access management, and why is it important? Explain the concept of access certification and its role in identity governance. What are passkeys and how do they differ from traditional FIDO2 credentials? Key terms. Account lifecycle management. The process of managing user accounts from creation through modification to deactivation and deletion. Authentication factor. A category of evidence used to verify identity. Credential stuffing. An automated attack using stolen username password pairs from data breaches to gain unauthorized access. CTAP2. Client to Authenticator Protocol, part of FIDO2. Decentralized identity. A self-sovereign identity model where individuals control their own credentials without relying on a central authority. Federated identity. Identity that can be used across organizational boundaries. FIDO2. Fast Identity Online 2. The modern passwordless standard. IGA. Identity governance and administration. IDDR. Identity threat detection and response. Security capabilities focused on detecting and responding to identity-based attacks. MFA, multi-factor authentication. OAuth 2.0, authorization framework for delegated access. OIDC, OpenID Connect, authentication layer on OAuth. PM, privileged access management. Passkey, FIDO2 credential that syncs across devices. SAML, security assertion markup language. SSO, single sign-on. TOTP, time-based one-time password. WebAuthn, Web Authentication API, part of FIDO2. Zero Trust, security model based on never trust, always verify. References and further reading. NIST Special Publication 800-63, Digital Identity Guidelines. FIDO Alliance Specifications and Implementation Guides. Google Beyond Corp Papers. OAuth 2.0 and OpenID Connect Specifications. Zero Trust Architecture Frameworks from NIST, Forrester, and vendors.